my most horrifying experience as a cop, an account shared with us by Mythology Loves Horror. I've been a cop since I was 22 years old. I graduated at the top of my class, acing my exams and tests. It wasn't long before I had a job offer after my official graduation. Despite the job being across the country, I eagerly took a flight and flew over, wanting to be seen as dependable and excited. Even so, nothing that they could have taught me in training would have prepared me for the horror that can stem from living in Vermont. If the freezing temperatures or angry bull moose don't kill you, then there's still plenty of other things that will. When I first agreed to take the job as an assistant trainer at the state police barracks in Newport, I thought it'd be all pretty green mountains and delicious maple syrup, but I was wrong. I originally came from Anaheim, California, and I'm convinced that this frigid wasteland will be the death of me. I've always considered myself a tough woman, but I know now that I'm woefully unequipped to handle everything out there. I don't think anyone's equipped to handle a situation like this one. The call that started this experience should have been a standard domestic abuse case, but it turned into something else. In the 3.5 years that I've been there, I've seen humans and animals frozen to death, lumberjacks squished by fallen trees, cars that had been totaled after running into a gigantic moose, and timber rattlesnakes that are as mean as any diamondback. I thought all that was bad enough, but I was not prepared to find myself in a situation that I could not logic my way out of. I didn't have any paperwork left to do that Saturday, and because I'm trained in the field, I asked my friend Officer T if I could ride with him on a domestic abuse call that had just come in. His partner had already gone home for the night, so he readily agreed to take me along as backup. As we threw on our jackets and headed out to the snow-dusted patrol cruiser, I felt a flutter of excitement. I hadn't gone out in the field in a few months, and I'd been itching for some action now, especially since my most recent class had graduated. I looked over the notes, ingraining them into my mind. We were to speak with a Mr. B who was the suspected wife-beater. Officer T and I drove for about 15 minutes, and eventually we found ourselves on one of those pothole-covered roads that Vermont is famous for. The snow was nearly up to our thighs, and even our tactical SUV was having some trouble getting up a few of the icier hills. We cursed our luck at being sent to a residence out in the countryside, especially since it was about 7 p.m. and it was pitch black out. It was a concerned neighbor who had called us, and when we got to Mrs. F's house to hear her report, the distressed woman told us that there were strange screams coming from the creek area behind the houses. We'd been under the impression that the fighting had been occurring inside her neighbor's house, but apparently that was not the case. She led us out to her back porch, and sure enough, after stepping through the doorway, we heard screams. They were very hard to describe. They sounded like a strangely pitched version of a frantic woman yelling. Each scream lasted for about 3 to 10 seconds. Though it never sounded like it was saying actual words. It was more a cry of sheer terror, stuck on an infinite loop. My adrenaline was pumping so hard that I didn't even want to bother knocking on Mr. B's door. Protocol dictates that we could go next door and question the suspect, but under circumstances where someone is clearly in trouble, we're allowed to prioritize their safety over standard inquiries. This being the case, we sprinted from the porch, making our way as quickly and carefully as we could towards that awkward sound. Officer T and I heard 2 more screams. each of them getting louder as we approached the creek. We were both getting a little unnerved, and as we made our way deeper into the woods, we quietly discussed whether or not we thought it was an animal or a person. The screams of a mountain lion can sound just like those of a distressed woman, and our little flashlights weren't doing much to illuminate the shadow-filled forest. We were finally beginning to approach the creek bed, and we hadn't heard a scream for about 5 minutes. We had begun calling out for someone to come forward if they were there, or to help lead us to whoever was hurt, but there was no other sounds. I had been checking for footprints, but there were only ours and deer tracks. The powdered snow that we were kicking up was causing a fine sheen of mist-like coverage, but even so, we did a thorough sweep of the area and hadn't seen any signs of a blood trail or struggle. Officer T and I were just about to turn back and head for the car when the air around us erupted into a cacophony of shouting, screaming, and savage howling. We were both startled, and I could see my confusion echoed in his face. I opened my mouth to make sure that he was experiencing the same crazy phenomenon that I was, and then we heard an exact copy of that scream from when we were on the porch. It came from directly behind us, but there was nothing there but an open clearing. Officer T resolutely marched into the woods on the opposite side of the clearing to investigate. And then there was a chunk of silence for several minutes. I didn't even hear his footsteps crunching for a long time, and I was starting to get anxious. About 10 minutes later, he emerged from a different direction, and for a split moment, I thought that I saw his eyes shine bright yellow in the beam from my flashlight. I dismissed that thought, knowing that the glint of snow off the light was playing tricks on me. Officer T beckoned me over, but I told him that we needed to get out of here. He looked almost angry for a moment, then he crossed the clearing to me. I watched with unease as he plowed awkwardly through the snow, stumbling like he had been drinking. I was about to ask what was wrong with him when an odd cry came from our right. I nearly screamed out loud. That was the last straw for me. I grabbed Officer T's arm and all but dragged him back through the snow, keeping a firm grip on his bicep so that he wouldn't stumble again. I was 60 pounds lighter than him, but my adrenaline was pumping so strongly that I was able to get us through the snow and up the hill like it was nothing. Just as we got halfway back to the house, the scream came again, this time sounding like it was right next to me. In a panic, I frantically shone my flashlight around in every direction to find it, to find what we were being pursued by. But there was nothing. In that glacial Vermont forest, there was not even a glint of animal eyes, no rustling of bushes, no sounds of footfalls, just tense silence after that scream. As I frantically traced our steps back to the house, a desperate wail sliced through the air. But I swear, I heard it calling my name. By then, I was too horrified to go back out there. I tried my best to keep my wits about me, enough to stop and tell Mrs. F to call us if anything else occurred. But she never did call again, and the officer who did a follow-up the next day did not report anything unusual. That night, I got Officer T and I out of there as fast as the cruiser would go, and I don't regret that choice. I still have no idea what was in those woods, but as an avid outdoors woman, I know no animal makes that kind of wail. Whenever I bring this up, Officer T just says the same cryptic sentence, telling me that I should be glad I got out of there alive. He says that the danger that night was closer than I knew. I think only he knows how close of a call it was.